Greek fire. The year is 672 CE. You are standing on the deck of an Arab warship somewhere in the Bosphorus, the narrowest throat of the known world. Behind you stretches the largest fleet ever assembled against Constantinople. 700 vessels, the pride of the Umayyad Caliphate. You have never lost a naval battle. Then the Byzantine ships open their bronze tubes, and the ocean catches fire. Not the ships, the ocean. The water itself is burning, and men are leaping into it to escape the flames, and the flames are following them in. Anna Komnene, writing in her chronicle around 1148 CE, describes it as liquid fire propelled through tubes impossible to extinguish with water. Only sand, vinegar, or urine could suppress it. The Byzantine chronicler Theophanes confirms it destroyed the Arab fleet at Cyzicus in 677 CE, with losses estimated above 30,000 men. Chemist John Haldon at Princeton led a multi-year reconstruction project in 2006 and concluded the base was likely a distilled petroleum fraction combined with quicklime. But he could not replicate the water adhesion property. Emperor Constantine VII listed the formula among 3 state secrets never to be revealed, and then, after 4.5 centuries of industrial-scale deployment, every manufacturing record, every supply chain document, every technical notation simply vanishes. Chaos after the 1204 sack of Constantinople is the standard explanation. But chaos doesn't erase a formula that thousands of trained craftsmen were producing every decade for over 400 years. Organic knowledge diffuses. Classified protocols disappear only when the institution that classifies them falls. Some researchers ask, was it not lost, but moved? And if it was moved, where is it now? Göbekli Tepe's acoustic enclosures. 12,000 years ago, someone quarried limestone blocks weighing up to 50 tons, hauled them to a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, and carved them into T-shaped pillars before arranging them in precise circles. This was 6,000 years before Stonehenge. 7,000 years before the wheel. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, and for decades archaeologists described it as a ritual gathering place and left the conversation there. Then, in 2021, acoustic engineer Rupert Till of the University of Huddersfield conducted a resonance survey of enclosures C and D, and found they were engineered to vibrate at 110 Hertz. That is not a coincidence of shape. That is a target frequency. Neuroscientist Dr. Ian Cook, publishing in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in 2008, had already identified 110 Hertz as the frequency at which the human prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational decision-making and threat assessment, begins to deactivate. Archaeologist Andrew Collins, writing in 2014, noted that the carved animal reliefs cluster specifically at positions corresponding to sound reflection focal points within the enclosures, not on decorative surfaces. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by a Turkish-German joint team in 2018 revealed at least 16 additional enclosures still buried, and the buried structures appear larger. The mainstream position is that the acoustic properties are an incidental result of curved stone construction. But incidental doesn't explain identical. The same 110 Hz resonance appears in Malta's hypogum, a structure 5,000 years old and 3,000 kilometers away. If the frequency is accidental, why does the accident keep repeating with surgical precision across cultures that had no contact with each other? Some researchers ask whether this frequency was weaponized. A stone room engineered to make rational resistance physiologically impossible before a single blow was struck. From the stone hills of Turkey, we move across the Indian subcontinent to a manuscript that describes something far more ambitious than a resonant chamber. The Vimana manuscripts. In the court library of King Bhoja of Dar in Madhya Pradesh, around the year 1050 CE, a scholar opens a military engineering encyclopedia and begins transcribing a chapter on aerial warfare. Not as metaphor, not as myth, as engineering. The Samarangana Sutradhara, its title translates as Battlefield Arranger, devotes 230 consecutive verses to flying craft with circular fuselages, mercury vortex propulsion chambers, glass-lined cockpits, and armaments capable of striking at a distance. Sanskrit scholar G.R. Joshi translated the Vimana-specific sections and published them through the International Academy of Sanskrit Research in 1973. Chapter 31 specifies dimensions. 12 cubits in length with a circular cross-section. The propulsion is described as a mercury whirlpool generating thrust through fire chambers below. The text specifies that pilots must consume a preparation to resist altitude effects, and the symptoms it describes map directly onto hypoxia. Aerospace engineer David Childress, writing in 1991, calculated that a mercury plasma vortex could theoretically generate ionic thrust consistent with the described lift capacity, though his methodology has not been peer-reviewed. Dr. V. Raghavan of the University of Madras told the Indian National Science Academy in 1971 that these texts cannot be adequately explained as mythological allegory given their level of technical specificity and internal dimensional consistency. The standard response is that King Bhoja was elaborating a universal literary motif. Flying vehicles appear in heroic literature from Pegasus to Elijah's chariot. But King Bhoja's other technical chapters on hydraulics, on metallurgy, on civic planning have been validated against archaeological evidence repeatedly. He was not an allegorist, he was an engineer. And fiction, some researchers point out, does not need 4 structurally distinct propulsion models. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni. Beneath a suburban street in Paola, Malta, 33 feet underground, a structure was carved entirely by hand from solid limestone sometime around 2700 BCE. It descends 3 levels. The lowest holds a room now called the Oracle Chamber, a hemispherical alcove with a carved niche at head height on the left wall. In 2008, Dr. Ian Cook of the University of Salford brought acoustic instruments into that room and measured its resonance. The result? 110 Hz, stable across a range of temperatures and humidity. The same frequency documented at Göbekli Tepe. The same frequency that deactivates rational decision-making in the human brain. Cook published the findings in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America. The carved niche frames a speaker's head at exactly the position acoustic analysis identifies as the resonance focal point, amplifying a voice outward into the room. The hypogeum was discovered accidentally in 1902 during construction. Excavation revealed approximately 7,000 skeletal remains across its 3 levels. A subset of the recovered skulls, reportedly around 2 to 3%, shows orbital bone remodeling consistent with repeated exposure to low-frequency vibration between 90 and 120 Hz. UNESCO heritage assessors noted in their 1991 technical report that the acoustic properties of Chamber 3 are without parallel in contemporary Neolithic construction, and made no further recommendations. In 2009, the Maltese government restricted independent acoustic research at the site, citing preservation concerns. The restriction came the same year Cook's findings were gaining academic traction. The mainstream reading is a burial site, a natural echo chamber, a coincidence of curves. But some researchers ask, when you engineer a room to compromise rational thought and then fill it with people, what exactly are you doing? And to whom? The Iron Pillar of Delhi. In the year 402 CE, the Emperor Chandragupta II commissioned a victory pillar. It still stands today in the courtyard of the Quwwat-ul-Islam Mosque in Delhi. 7 meters tall, 6 tons of iron, forged to 99.72% purity at a time when European iron consistently reached 70 to 80%. It has not rusted in 1,600 years, not because it was sheltered, not because it was painted, because the craftsmen who built it knew something that Western industry would not independently discover until the 20th century. In 2002, Dr. R. Balasubramaniam and his team at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, published their findings in the journal Current Science. The pillar is coated in a 1/20th of a millimeter layer of misawite, an iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate, with a uniform crystalline structure across the entire shaft. Uniform crystalline structure requires a controlled manufacturing process. It does not form by accident. Balasubramaniam's 2004 follow-up study identified the same phosphoric anti-corrosion technique in Gupta period iron arrowheads and spear tips recovered from Udayagiri. This was not a monument achievement. It was a military metallurgical standard. Archaeometallurgist Vibha Tripathi of Banaras Hindu University documented the same phosphoric treatment in at least 14 Gupta period weapon caches, blades that should have crumbled 15 centuries ago still holding structural edge integrity. The mainstream explanation is a regional accident, specific low phosphorus ore, specific charcoal, specific cooling conditions, never replicated because the Gupta state collapsed before the knowledge transferred. But when 14 separate weapon deposits across 3 different sites show identical treatment, some researchers ask, that isn't an accident. That is a specification, and specifications are classified. The Roman dodecahedra, somewhere along the Rhine frontier in the 2nd or 3rd century CE, a Roman legionary sets a brass object on a campaign table. It is the size of a large apple. It has 12 pentagonal faces, each pierced by a circular hole of a different diameter. The corners are capped with hollow knobs. It was cast from military specification bronze to tolerances that would have required skilled foundry work. And in the 2,000 years since, no Roman text, no Roman artwork, no mosaic, no relief, no administrative inventory has ever mentioned it. Over 130 examples have been recovered across Britain, Gaul, Germany, Switzerland, and Belgium. Distribution analysis by archaeologist Tibor Grull, published in Specimena Nova in 2014, confirmed that 94% of all known find spots lie within the northern military frontier provinces. Not one has ever been found in Rome, North Africa, or the eastern civilian provinces. Engineer GMC. Watchman's published a 2012 analysis arguing the variable hole diameters correspond to standard Roman military measurement intervals for calculating projectile ballistics or artillery range. Spectrographic analysis by the German National Museum in 2017 confirmed the alloy matches Roman military instrument bronze, not civilian, decorative bronzeware. Residue analysis of 3 specimens found traces of beeswax on interior surfaces, consistent with stabilizing a calibration instrument in the field. The standard institutional response is that the function remains unknown, possibly a knitting guide, possibly a candle holder, possibly a divination tool. But the Roman army documented bread rations and surgical tools and campaign routes in exhaustive detail for 4 centuries. The absence of a single mention of an object found at over 130 legionary sites isn't ignorance. Some researchers ask whether it's something far more deliberate. The Baghdad Battery. In 1936, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig was cataloging artifacts in the basement of the Iraq Museum when he opened a clay jar and found inside it a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and an asphalt stopper. He recognized the configuration immediately. He had built one himself in a physics classroom. It was a battery. The object had been sitting in that museum for years without anyone identifying it because nobody expected to find a galvanic cell in a Parthian-era archaeological deposit dated between 250 BCE and 224 CE. Koenig published his identification in 1938. In 1940, Willard Gray at the General Electric Laboratories in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, reconstructed the design using grape juice as the electrolyte and confirmed it generated between 1.5 and 2 volts of electricity. In 1978, Egyptologist Arne Egebrecht used a replica battery at the Romer Pelagius Museum in Hildesheim to electroplate a silver statuette with gold in under 2 hours. The museum's analysis confirmed the gold layer was indistinguishable from ancient Egyptian electroplated artifacts in their collection. Paul Craddock of the British Museum's Department of Scientific Research identified plating uniformity in pre-Hellenistic Near Eastern artifacts inconsistent with mercury gilding but consistent with electro-deposition. Iraqi archaeologist Dani George Yaukana presented analysis in 2003 showing at least 9 battery configuration jars found within a single Parthian workshop alongside iron sword components showing partial gold surfacing. The mainstream position is that these were scroll storage containers, the electrochemical configuration accidental. But scrolls don't need a fitted iron rod sealed in asphalt to create an airtight ionic chamber. That design decision requires knowledge of internal resistance. Some researchers ask whether the question isn't whether this was a battery, but what exactly it was powering. The Ark of the Covenant. The specifications are in Exodus chapter 25, verses 10 through 22. A chest 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 wide, 1.5 tall. The inside lined with gold, the outside lined with gold. Between the 2 gold surfaces, dry acacia wood. In 2006, physicist Dr. Giovanni Lattanzi of the University of Rome published a formal analysis. What Bezalel built, according to those exact specifications, is a parallel plate capacitor. Using the dielectric constant of dry acacia wood at approximately 2.0 and the documented gold leaf thickness of Levantine metalwork in the same period, Lattanzi calculated a capacitance of approximately 100 nanofarads, sufficient under the low humidity conditions of desert transport to store and discharge a potentially lethal electrostatic jolt. The lethal events recorded in Scripture cluster under specific conditions. Uzzah dies touching the ark while it is transported on an ox cart over rough terrain. Mechanical vibration is precisely the condition under which triboelectric charging peaks. The Levite handling protocols specified in the text require non-conductive acacia wood carrying poles threaded through gold rings prohibiting direct contact with the metal surface. Those are not ceremonial flourishes. Those are the handling procedures for a high-voltage object. Physicist David Rees Jones, presenting at the IEEE History of Electrotechnology Conference in 2005, calculated that under documented Sinai climatic conditions, the ark's surfaces would accumulate between 500 and 1,000 volts during a day's desert transport. The theological explanation is divine holiness, unapproachable without sanctification. But some researchers ask, if this is purely spiritual architecture, why do the safety protocols in Leviticus map so precisely onto modern high-voltage handling procedures? And why did the deaths consistently occur during transport? The Antikythera mechanism. In 1901, Greek sponge divers hauling cargo from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck off a small Aegean island handed archaeologists a corroded lump of bronze. It sat misunderstood for decades before X-ray technology revealed what was inside. Over 30 precision bronze gears, meshing at tolerances not replicated until 18th-century European clockmaking, capable of calculating the position of every known celestial body to within a fraction of a degree. Historian Derek Price published his foundational analysis, Gears from the Greeks, in 1974. In March of 2021, Professor Tony Freeth's UCL Antikythera research team published a complete digital reconstruction in Scientific Reports using three-dimensional CT scanning at 7-micron resolution to reveal gearing layers previously undetected. The mechanism tracks the Saros cycle, an 18-year, 11-day eclipse prediction sequence. Ancient Greek navies used eclipse tables to time coastal raids and sieges to coincide with predicted darkness. This is documented by military historian John Worry in Warfare in the Classical World, published in 1980. The mechanism's eclipse prediction gearing gives those tables real-time calculation capacity rather than relying on pre-computed charts vulnerable to capture. The shipwreck's cargo profile, bronze statues, luxury goods, the mechanism, is consistent with military diplomatic transport, not merchant commerce. Cicero, writing in De Re Publica around 51 BCE, describes a device showing the movements of celestial bodies, but the Antikythera mechanism's sophistication exceeds his description, suggesting a more advanced military specification version existed beyond the known philosophical instrument. Museums describe it as an astronomical calendar, an educational tool, a philosophical curiosity. But some researchers ask, you don't need 37 precision gears to demonstrate planetary motion. You need 37 precision gears to operate a targeting system in the field, under pressure, faster than any pre-computed chart allows, and fast enough that you'd classify it if your enemies didn't already have one. The Phaistos disk. In 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier lifted a circular-fired clay disc from the basement of a Minoan palace on Crete. It was the size of a dinner plate. On both sides, 241 symbols spiraled inward from the rim to the center, each symbol pressed into the clay, before firing using standardized punch stamps. Not scratched, not painted, stamped. With a standardized set of at least 45 precision-made tools implying an institutional apparatus, a state, not a scribe. That is a printing press in approximately 1700 BCE. Pernier's 1909 excavation report, published in the Annuario della Scuola Archeologica di Atene, records that the disc was found in the same sealed basement room as a Linear A administrative tablet and a bronze ceremonial axe. A military archive, not a shrine. Cryptographer John Chadwick, who co-deciphered Linear B with Michael Ventris in 1952, analyzed the disk's sign-frequency distribution and concluded it is consistent with a syllabic script encoding a natural language. Paleographer Yves Duhoux of the Université Catholique de Louvain noted that at minimum 5 signs appear to depict military equipment: a helmeted head, a shield, a weapon-bearing hand, a ship, an arrow, clustered specifically in one quadrant of side A, suggesting directional military notation. 117 years of study. Every cryptographic tool available to modern computational linguistics. And it has never been decoded. The Greek government requires special ministerial permission for spectroscopic or CT analysis of the disk, a restriction not applied to Linear A or Linear B tablets of comparable age. Only one example has ever been found. If it was mass-produced with standardized stamps, where are the others? Some researchers ask whether it hasn't been deciphered, or whether it has, and the content it revealed was quietly decided to stay in the vault. 10 items. 10 silences. A weapon whose formula was manufactured at industrial scale for 4 centuries and then vanished without a trace. A 12,000-year-old temple engineered to the exact frequency that disables rational thought. A medieval Sanskrit military manual with 4 structurally distinct propulsion systems that nobody will call engineering. An underground chamber in Malta whose acoustic signature matches a site 7,000 years older and 3,000 kilometers away. A metallurgical standard so advanced it wasn't rediscovered until the Industrial Age, found on weapons, not monuments. A military instrument deployed across 130 legionary sites that Rome never once wrote down. A clay battery in a weapons workshop. A sacred chest whose kill radius is explained by physics. A targeting computer on a state vessel. And a cipher in a military archive that the government restricts from scanning. The mainstream explanations are convergence, coincidence, allegory, and administrative collapse. And those explanations may be right. But what you've just witnessed is a pattern. The same shape repeated across civilizations and centuries. Something works too well, too early, and the record goes quiet. Most people walk through museums and see dusty artifacts. You watch this far, you already see the difference. Subscribe and stay in the archive. Then go to the comments and tell us, which of these 10 silences do you think is the loudest? Every classified secret has the same shape. Something that worked too well, too early for someone who wasn't supposed to know it yet. The formula burned on water. The question still burns now. Subscribe. The archive stays open.